Welcome everyone to St. Louis County Library's virtual program, Our Garden is for the Birds, presented as part of the Partners for Native Landscaping webinar series. I'm Sarah Quince-Jones, Adult Programming Coordinator for St. Louis County Library. Before we get started, I wanted to bring to your attention a few helpful tips in case this is your first Zoom program or it's been a little while since you've joined us for one. First of all, this is a webinar, which means you should be able to see and hear us this evening, but we won't be able to see or hear you. We are recording, so this will be available on our YouTube channel within a few days, and you'll receive an email with the link when it is posted there. And we do have captioning available, so you can click on the caption button at the bottom of the Zoom screen to turn those on or off, or show or hide them is the language they use. And you can make those larger or smaller as well. If you experience any difficulties with your connection, we recommend you exit the program, move closer to your Wi-Fi router, and you can click the link again to come right back to us. We'll have the chat turned off during the majority of the presentation, but there will be time for questions at the end of the program. So hold on to those and we'll address them as we have time later on. But I'd like to remind you that you don't have to have a library card or even be a resident of St. Louis County in order to attend our virtual or in-person programs. We hope that you enjoy yourself or you learn something new today, hopefully both, and that you share those things with your family and friends, tell them you found out some great things through our programming. You can see the wide variety of things that we have available through our website at slcl.org/events. But as far as the Partners for Native Landscaping goes, we are hosting this webinar series. We have 3 more after tonight, but the Partners for Native Landscaping also have an in-person workshop and plant sale on April 15th from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Powder Valley Conservation Nature Center. And they'll also have a native plant fair with Beyond Housing on April 30th. You can find out more about that on the Partners website. I'll share that in a moment, along with everything else I'm going to talk about here in a moment. The next programs in the webinar series that the library is hosting here on Zoom, those will be shade gardening with native plants, and that's tomorrow, Wednesday, March 29th at 2 p.m. And then next Tuesday night at 7 p.m., it's April 4th, we will have Understanding Native Trees and Shrubs. So as I said, you can register for these programs, but any of the programs that we have at slcl.org/events. And also don't forget, you can catch up with any of our virtual programs by checking out the library's YouTube channel. I'll put in the links that I included, there'll also be a link to the other webinars from this series that have already been posted and onto the YouTube channel, so you can catch up on those if you've missed the other Partners for Native Landscaping webinars. All right, so along with all those things I'm going to put in the chat, I do want to tell you to keep an eye out, not only at the beginning here, but at the end for a link to a survey that will provide Partners for Native Landscaping with valuable feedback about today's webinar and help for planning next year's series. So we appreciate you taking the time to take a look at that. All right. Now I would love to introduce you to our presenter this evening, Margie Terpstra. Birder, nature photographer, and horticulturist, Margie Terpstra juggles binoculars, camera, and garden tools in her suburban conservation garden named Shady Oaks Sanctuary. Since 1996, Margie and her husband Dan have worked together to restore habitat on their half-acre property. Their yard has attracted more than 150 species of birds, some rare and endangered. Margie shares her images and observations of nature in a blog on their website, and I'm going to share the link to that as well. So keep an eye for that. But thank you so much for being with us this evening, Margie. We really appreciate to have you here as part of Partners for Native Landscaping. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I guess it's time to share screen.
If you're ready.
Well, I do want to say I thank the library and all the partners for putting this series on. It's just been rewarding to learn myself from every speaker that I've listened to. And you know, as far as all of you who've registered and who are listening tonight, you know, you may be new to natives, but no matter where you are on that continuum of bringing nature home. I do hope you'll learn a little something tonight, and hopefully helpful and hopeful ideas. So let's begin.
Looks great, Marty.
Okay, there we go. Okay. So the sad truth is that birds are in decline, and that's not good news for them or for any of us. And since 1970, we've lost 3 billion birds. And that number, well, we just can't even imagine, can't wrap our heads around that. So I'm going to approach this tonight from a little different way, different perspective. Okay, let's see if I can move that. There we go. So in 2016, a report came out that assessed every single species in North America. And that's 1,154 species. And it was determined at that time that 37% of our birds are on the watch list. And that means they're at risk of extinction without serious habitat considerations and improvement. And that means a bird has a score of 13 to 20. Okay, now at some point in time, there was probably no concern for birds, but things have changed. And as we go through the program, you'll see birds either in blue, yellow, orange, or red with their corresponding score next to their name. Because if we just take care of the birds, we'll take care of most of the environmental problems that we have. So tonight we're going to focus on beneficial things that we can do. And there are many, but tonight it's going to be about native plants, and avoiding pesticides. And both of these things work hand in hand. And before I get into that, I wanted to point out there are 2 freebie things that you ought to look into. The first is this wonderful booklet by Missouri Department of Conservation. And it tells you where the birds are, what time of year, and if they're rare or common or abundant. And the second is this free smartphone app that you can get through the Cornell Lab. And it's wonderful to be able to listen, use that when you're outside listening to birds, and it helps you to identify what you're hearing. Okay, so now we'll talk about the birds. Of course, this is our eastern bluebird, the state bird of Missouri. And they've had their ups and downs in different winters. They can really be knocked back in their populations. And here are a few of the many species that we have, which speaks to the diversity that we have. They come in many different sizes, shapes, and colors. To defend a territory, they sing, they have to find a mate, and then try to build a nest and raise their young. And it's quite time consuming and energy consuming. But they're persistent, and yet sometimes they lose out to competition. And the competition is often the European species that take over their nesting places and evict them. Now, there are some birds that are just here in the winter, and you may be familiar with the 2 on the right, the white-throated sparrow and the dark-eyed junco. I've had more fox sparrows. I've had 3 this winter, most I've ever seen, but I have yet to see an American tree sparrow. So in this winter. They don't show up every year. Now, some of these birds are beautiful neotropical migrants, and they need to eat up to 50% of their weight every time they stop to rest along their migratory journey. And this is what they look like in the spring. But some of them look very different in the fall. They still are all looking for the same food. Some of them do stay here in Missouri to nest. But no matter how much of their time they spend here in our state, all of our native birds need safe places where they can rest and find food and fresh water. And this is where we come in. Now, our birds are shared across all of the Americas. And our former state ornithologist, Brad Jacobs, worked for decades to be sure there was good communication between their partners in Central and South America, and that habitat was preserved or purchased to expand the needs, the habitat for these birds. And we lost Brad a couple years ago. And Sarah took his place for a year and continued his work. And now she has gone on to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service in tracking the birds. And that's very delicate work. They actually put little tags on their back, kind of like a backpack, so they can monitor them. It's fascinating work. And the birds are tracked then from their winter homes to the stopover habitats all the way up through here, up into Canada, where most of them will breed. And the one comment that struck me when I heard her speak recently was that the birds are very loyal to these places where they find food and what they need. So we need to hear that. And the waterfowl, the ducks and geese, as they migrate, they learn the routes from the flock by flying in their family group. But the smaller birds, like the neotropical migrants that we saw before, and hummingbirds, they actually encode everything they need to make their migratory journey into their DNA. And that gets passed along to their chicks. Now that's pretty amazing. We humans can't do that. So it's a really particular attribute about birds that just fascinates me. Now, another thing that I learned recently is that birdsong is the primary indicator of habitats that support our health, that are good for us. And when Europeans first arrived in the 1600s, forests covered half the total land area, 1 billion acres. There's that billion number again. But by 1907, a third of that forest was gone. And we see it all around us. We know it's happening still. Habitat loss for all of these different reasons. In fact, Doug Tallamy in his books has said 95% of the land is either cities and suburbs with chemically treated lawns, agriculture and grazing. 95% of the land is used this way. And only 5% left is in park and conservation land. And beautiful as it is, that 5% is not enough to sustain all of life. So that's why we really do need to help save life on Earth. We need functional ecosystems everywhere. So let's save it where we live. And we in Missouri happen to live right smack dab in the Mississippi Flyway, in the middle. And 54% of our Missouri birds use this flyway. So what could be better than to provide the native plants and the foods that they need through this habitat? Diversity builds stability in our ecosystems. And so that's why the goal is to restore this plant habitat with layers of native plants. And these plants for pollinators are also plants for birds. They're right on the same trajectory as Dr. Narango talked about in her talk in the keynote. So in our yard, we've taken it a little bit further, and we have a minimal disturbance policy. And that means if we have something to do, we go out together, we work quickly, we get it done, and we open that area back up for the birds to just do what they need to do. And as a result, we've had 155 species now in our yard. All of the possible expected 36 warbler species and a couple of hybrids. So as we said before, the birds are literally the canaries in the coal mine. And this is the most endangered bird that we see in our yard, the golden winged warbler. And it's a 16. It scored a 16. There is a group that's working very hard to determine all the reasons why this bird is having trouble. And again, providing habitat is how we can help. Now, I've also documented all of these birds that are on the watch list. 16 species total. 10% of the birds seen in our yard are on that watch list. So I have to think that somehow we are helping them. We just need to get more yards going in the same direction. Oh, and then we've got another 13 species that have a score of 12. And this one is a drawing because that's the bird that convinced me I needed to learn how to photograph. It was only the 10th record from Missouri, and it happened 20 years ago. So I've been photographing the bird since then. And you can see the beautiful Louisiana water thrush and the northern bobwhite. But this bird was a surprise. I was really surprised to learn that mourning doves are 12. This is the first bird, the first mourning dove I've ever photographed that was a young bird in our yard. So I have seemed to have doves all the time, but that's the first youngster. That was last fall. Okay, so we're not out in the country and we don't have 100 acres. We're a mile from the mall. And the good part is we're in this tract of older hickory and oak forest with lots of diversity. Now, when we first came upon this property and stepped out of the car, it was May, and the bird song was just incredible, but it was up high in the canopy. And that's because there really wasn't much going on in this turf. Maybe some birds were back in the wetland. But when we looked at the deck and saw all this honeysuckle, we thought, okay, we'll tackle it. It's going to be a lot of work. So, so we began eradicating these invasive plants. Excuse me a second. And that meant once we started getting rid of those, we could start planting and converting more of the area to native plants. So about September of '08, we laid out this garden area, the bird and butterfly garden. And you can see all through here is still honeysuckle and winter creeper. But it's good to take out some bad and then have a place where you can put in some good, because then you feel like you're making some progress. And the monarch wing seemed to just strike me as a perfect design to use. So we got it all planted. And this design included a stone border. And it's good to have some kind of a border, either stone or brick or logs, maybe from branches and trees that you have taken down. But it shows intention. It's an intentional garden space. And by the following summer, this area had filled in just beautifully. Native plants respond really well. And we keep the edges neat, but this area in the middle, the minimal disturbance area, we don't go in. Once we do that initial spring cleanup, we don't go in there very much, because we want the bees and the birds and the butterflies, everybody to just have their space. So this is a bird's eye view of our lot. Thank you, Google, from that same year. And I'm thinking maybe the garden, which you can see the outline of it, maybe that is a landmark that the birds added to their DNA, because we keep seeing more birds. Or maybe there's some flashing neon sign that's telling them, this is a great area, come down here, but it's working. Now, in the front, we wanted to make some changes. Now, this was pretty. We had the rose and the clematis, and it was pretty, expected, but I wanted to get native plants functioning up there. So you might think about adding a trellis or something that vines can climb, because there are some really nice native vines, and this coral trumpet honeysuckle is one of them. It is not technically native here. It has naturalized in our area, and you can tell it's obviously doing very well and attracting hummingbirds. And we have occasionally seen the hummingbird clearwing moth, and they are one of the moths that will lay their eggs on this plant. Now, another thing you might think about doing is think, where can I add a bed or just enlarge a bed to get more natives in? And we had to get some kind of path in here. We wanted this gate, and we had to improve that area to slow down the water. So we did incorporate almost all natives in here, except this sedge, which is eye stance, Carex eye stance. However, there's so many more native sedges available in the market now that it would be a great place to put them if we hadn't already gotten this one in. So you might also want to think about nice curving paths as a way to create just a little mystery in your garden. And we'll come back to this area in a few slides, see what's down there. So it came time to try to go for platinum, and we were ready. So if you've checked out the Bring Conservation Home program, then you know you must meet that requirement of having all those invasives gone and 50% natives in. And by the time we got rid of all the invasives, we had even more habitat. We were at 76%. So another premise that I think we need to keep in mind is that these plants and insects and birds have co-evolved. They've evolved together. And the sun just shines and gives its energy to the plants, and they make carbohydrates. And then the insects come in and they chew on those leaves, and they take the energy from the plants, and then the birds come in and eat some of those insects, and that keeps the plants healthy. So it all works together in harmony. And this is the way it's supposed to be when you have the native plants helping the insects and the birds. Now, there are 5% of native plants that make up most of the food. And just like this keystone in the arch of that bridge, it stabilizes that bridge and keeps it from collapsing. And these keystone plants do the same things in our ecosystem. And the food that these plants make up is caterpillars. They are the highest, they make up the highest dietary component for 96% of our native birds. If you don't have this food, you're not going to have birds. So one beautiful morning, this prothonotary warbler came in, and you can see he's got a score of 14 on this black caw viburnum, and he just slips his bill into that curled leaf, and voila, he's found some breakfast. So this is the kind of behavior that I see more and more now in our yard because we have these native plants. And those caterpillars come in as many different sizes, shapes, and colors as the birds because they're butterflies and moths, so they're colored too. So I know some of you know the answer to this. Why do our native birds feed on caterpillars? They're soft, large, high in proteins and lipids, low in that hard exoskeleton, the chitin. They don't have that. And they're the best source of carotenoids, which we all need as antioxidants for our immunity. So they feed them caterpillars. But how many caterpillars does it take to raise one little brood of chickadees? 5 to 8 chickadees. We're talking a lot. We're talking 1,000 per chick. And that's just to get them out of the nest, because they continue feeding them caterpillars as they show them other foods to eat. And if we don't have these caterpillars, we're not going to have baby birds. Now, migrating birds like this little warbler, this northern parula, they look for chickadees. They listen for chickadees and titmice, because if they're singing and they're happy, well, there must be obviously well fed. And that means there's plenty of food around. And so here's this northern parula, and it comes in, same group of plants, the black caw viburnum that the prothonotary was on. And see that little inchworm? That's what we're talking about. Caterpillars, inchworms, whatever you want to call them, they're food, and they're food for birds. So make a plan for diversity in your yard. Evaluate your areas. Be sure you get rid of those invasives so you have a clean slate. But allow native saplings to grow, because those black caw viburnums that you'll continue to see in the program, they were saplings that we left. I wasn't sure what they were, but we were going to find out. And then remember, plants for pollinators are plants for birds. And you get those keystone plants in place, the highest, most beneficial keystone plants, and your plants for specialists. And you're on your way. You're on your way. And with each of these steps that you take, your landscape becomes a positive ecological force. And that's what we need, positive benefits. Now, you can have 20%, maybe up to 30 that are not invasive, that are non-native. But if we're really going to bring back the birds and increase their population, we really need 80%. It's a challenge. How do you know what to plant? Well, there's some good ways to find out, and these links are on your handout that that Sarah made sure everybody got. Okay, here is my list. You go to the National Wildlife Federation Plant Finder and you sign up, make an account, and you put in your zip code. And up comes your list of trees. Your keystones are always listed at the top because they support the highest number of bird and butterfly caterpillars. I mean, sorry, butterfly and moths. They support the highest numbers of butterflies and moths, the Lepidoptera. Another manual that we found very helpful in getting rid of the invasives was the Shaw Nature Reserve Manual. And this is something you can download each chapter. And we really used it for removal, partly because you'll see in a minute, but it was very helpful to us. The others are all beneficial as well. Okay, so as you're on this journey and you want to share with your neighbors what you're doing, it's good to have signs, let them know. Especially the last few years during 2020, especially, we had a lot more people walking by who showed a lot of interest in actually reading the signs, even on very cold days, just to find out what was going on. And then get on the map. If you heard Jean Ponzi, she's the cheerleader for getting everybody on this homegrown national park map. And that's another thing you can do. They're up to almost 25,000 habitats now. And that's how we help each other out. I think that's how we see that we're all making progress. Okay, in our oak woodland, we now have the canopy as we had before. We still have that good canopy, but we have highly functioning plants. We have keystone plants in every layer. And what I used to call the forest floor, there's a new term now that Heather Holm and the group in her neighborhood greening group in Minnesota coined this term. And I think it's just an absolutely perfect fit. The soft landings are places where you've left the leaves, plant debris, your wildflower layer, ground covers. And that's where those caterpillars come down and finish their life cycle along with other insects. Okay, so our oak, the white oak, this tree across the country is the highest keystone plant. So if you have oaks, be glad. If you don't, see if you can't plant one and start there. So that little Prothonotary, I followed him for 2 hours that day, and he was finding food in all these different native plants, all these different levels. And it just really shows that they are the best bird feeders, if you want to think of them as bird feeders. Now, this is pretty fun. Okay, we're going to talk about one plant and one moth. The smooth hydrangeas we have in several places in the yard. They attract lots and lots of pollinators. The birds like the seeds. And then there's this moth. Okay, the yellow-rumped warbler here is looking in the leaf litter for food. And this moth emerges in the spring and mates, lays its eggs, and here are these little tiny caterpillars. And the caterpillars then, they're called the hydrangea leaf tires, leaf tire moth caterpillars, tie the leaf together. They make a little pouch. And so all the little caterpillars are in there, and oh, they're happy because they're protected. Okay. Well, if you Google oddball on hydrangea, that's what it's called, an oddball, you will come up with a list of 6, 8, 10 different wonderful chemicals that you can use to kill these worms. on your plants. But we're avoiding pesticides, right? We don't want to use pesticides. And guess who comes to dinner? None other than our most endangered bird, because these birds have evolved with these plants and insects, and they know that that's essential food for them. I think I'm up to 30 different species of birds that look for food on these hydrangeas because they know it's there. So if you avoid the pesticides, you will be helping to save over 300 species of birds here in St. Louis. You avoid the pesticides, you're going to be helping to save 430 species of our native Lepidoptera, those moth and butterflies here in St. Louis. And you avoid pesticides, and you'll be helping to save over 200 species of native bees right here. So that's what we need to be doing. And as far as maintenance, we've been out there a little bit. We've been starting this process because we've left the flower stalks to provide seeds and shelter for the insects and birds and everybody all winter. I had juncos and goldfinches out there today. And when it comes time to cut these stems, which it is time now, we cut these pithy stems to staggered heights. And pretty soon they'll be covered up with new greenery, but the stems actually become places for a lot of our nesting bees to lay their eggs in. So that's why we do that. Now, this is a blast from the past here. This was the last time that we covered all of our beds with hardwood mulch. And I'm not sure why I took these pictures, but I found them and I thought, well, there you go. That's the story. Here we had left the leaves, but we were covering it. And I have since learned that's not the best for all of the insects. Because if we're really going to restore ecosystem function, we want to leave the leaves and let them be the mulch, let them protect the plants and provide places for these caterpillars to pupate and bees and all kinds of, well, let's take a look. There's much more going on here when you combine the fallen leaves and diverse native plantings and the plant debris. This is your soft landing. This is what we were talking about in the woodland. And now we've got this all in the front yard as well. So this happens to be a tree at the botanical garden. You can see the climatron kind of back here. But maybe this looks like a tree in your front yard. If you could just leave the leaves in this area, you don't want to plant that close to the tree because of the tree's feeder roots. You want to come out a few feet. Then you could start planting some bluebells, some mayapple, some of your spring ephemerals, and eventually all of this area could become much more beneficial to our pollinators. And soft landings are this critical habitat for our butterflies, our bees, our beetles. Yes, lightning bug is actually a beetle, and moths. This is where they pupate. And violets are also important as one of those wildflowers. I checked with the Xerces Society, and 14 different species of fritillary butterflies will only lay their eggs on violets. So they lay their eggs, the larvae finish eating, and they're ready to pupate. And where do they go? Right over into the brown leaves. So this is an important concept just to kind of wrap your heads around. there's nothing bad about violets. They support 25 different moths and butterflies. And same with the cranesbill geranium. Here, there's a little bee on there. And of course, the violets are nutritious. We can't forget that. So these soft landings just really become critical in helping to save the insects as well. And they also provide shelter so that the birds can come in and find some of this native food as well. Now I just want to show you this last area that we had to tackle before we got to the platinum level. English ivy. This was before treatment, when we used the method as described in the Shaw Nature Reserve Manual. And so we left the beds in, the leaves in the beds since the fall of 2015. And at some point, there was some Eastern bee balm I had planted up in this bed, and it seeded over into here. And so I kind of kept an eye on it. A few years later, we added some plants to this bed. It was looking really good. Here's a black haw, here's a rusty black haw, some beautyberry. And then there are these bee balm heads down here. Okay, in May last year, it looked like this. Now, this little plant is kind of interesting because I have tried it in several different places in the yard. And, you know, they talk about getting the right plant in the right place. Sometimes the plant tells you, this is where I want to be. And that's exactly what those seeds had taken hold and done so well there that the first year that they were in, we had 6 nights of hard freeze. And the leaves, right there, leaves are protecting the crown of that plant even more effectively than any hardwood mulch. And that plant looks delicate. I'm telling you, it's tough. It is a tough plant. And the flowers go on to provide nectar and pollen and seeds. And I still, just the other day, had goldfinches flying up from there. I had half a dozen goldfinches in that little bed who were still getting seeds all through the winter. So we have a lot to learn from our plants. And here's that good old black haw viburnum again. Golly, it just feeds birds right and left. And we can tell on that new rusty black haw in the front, there's already some evidence that moths and butterflies are laying their eggs on it. And here, I did not know this was a caterpillar until I saw that chestnut-sided grab it and whack it. And then it was down the hatch. I mean, it's just so amazing to see these things happen right in front of you. Just so amazing. So we're feeding the birds, definitely feeding the birds. And the other thing to note is that this leafy organic matter, the soft landings, it's a vital component of habitat because all of these little caterpillars, these little inchworms, want to get down in there to pupate in that soft duff, the duff. And this is where the birds will find them, like that rusty blackbird has found a little inchworm, but they also find spiders and crickets and other, I'm not sure what the yellow-throated warbler has. It looks like maybe an assassin bug of some kind. And the birds find emerging insects and larvae in decaying wood, and native bees will overwinter and nest in there. My friend Kathy shared that picture with me. Brush piles are important because, again, they're sheltering insects and birds. And that little winter wren spent 8 days there one fall. And you can screen a brush pile if you want. If you're worried about it, it works. It's a hardworking asset. Now, in late summer, goldenrod, the cliff goldenrod, this is a keystone plant, and it attracts a 97 Lepidoptera. It's one of the top keystone plants in the herbaceous group. And if you want to increase the bloom and extend the bloom time, you can cut them back in early June. And I usually alternate and do every other one, because then you get some early bloom and some that bloom a little later. And then again in fall and winter, they're packed with seeds and the birds are still, well, I just trimmed them back, but the birds had been finding seeds all winter. The high sugar fruits are important to thrushes like the robin and the eastern bluebirds. And so the adults bring their young birds in like this bluebird. And the black cherry is another keystone plant that we're fortunate to have in our yard. Lots of fruit and lots of bird activity in those trees, as well as 313 butterfly species use that as their host plant. Both of these butterflies use it. Caterpillars and moths on Virginia creeper. Again, many different species use this plant. And that's the white-lined sphinx moth. It's a host plant for that butterfly moth or sphinx moth as well. And in September, the berries of the Virginia creeper are eaten by many different migrating birds. They're not good for us, but the birds tolerate them. And then the viburnum have so many pollinators on those little flowers, and they produce this wonderful fruit. And it's a really nice size, fatty fruit that helps the birds get through the winter. And our rusty blackhaw finally showing a bit of fruit this year as well. Sugar maple is another important keystone plant, and it's providing food all year. Insects for the warblers, for the bluebirds to feed their young, seeds and sap for the sapsucker. Birds build nests in the green ash, and they're being lost to the emerald ash borer. But the woodpeckers and their allies will eat these beetle larvae. And so they do cut back on that population by 85% once they start taking them. But that's not enough. This insect is it's just wreaking havoc on our forests. So there's still more to be done, but at least the diversity helps to a certain degree. Diversity, that's what we're talking about. So many different birds. We have small mammals, of course, that come in and eat the insects or maybe the plants, but then they become food sources for the hawks and the owls and other mammals that come in. And they indicate, you start seeing these big birds, that indicates stability and balance in your little local ecosystem. Somebody's always eating somebody. Now we do some supplemental feeding in winter, and that helps to increase their survival so that they get to spring. And if they can find a good area to build a nest and mate, then they will go ahead and do that. And we have chickadees and bluebirds nesting right now. We haven't seen pine siskins this year, but the pine siskin and nuthatches move on up into Canada to breed. So we have all this diversity in the plant layers, providing all this essential food. And that's an ideal habitat. These native plants are the diversity that supports life. So cover, places to rest and to nest like these cardinals. And then that little cardinal has to grow up. And here he's found a katydid to eat down in the lawn, which is safe because we don't treat it with pesticides. Okay, so that's a safe place for that bird to find food. but we have to talk about water. And I'm running a little long, but we'll get there. Okay, so bird baths provide fresh water. The vernal wetland that we have also provides food and water for many, many different species that come through. But I want to talk about a few ways that you might think about adding moving water. Because all birds need to drink and to bathe, and that flowing oxygenated water is cleaner. The birds see sunlight dancing on the water, and they hear it from quite a distance. Moving water is going to attract more birds. Now, this is a little dripper on a bird bath. And we'll be setting, we have 2 of these, and we will be setting them up soon. We kind of have to watch the frost dates, but basically it's from mid-April to mid-October. And these drippers, you can buy them as complete units, or you can just purchase the parts if you want to make your own. But placing it on a dripper placing a dripper on a bird bath in the shade is a good idea. It keeps the water cooler that way, and you have moisture loving plants nearby that will help take up some of that water. And here's ours right here. It's just got the tubing held on by vinyl coated wire. So that dripping water gently replenishes the bird bath. And if you have an old bird bath like this one, you can always add pea gravel, which brings the level up to that, about 2 inches. That's about what you want. And here we are back at this gate. And right behind that hydrangea is where we have that bird bath. And I just wanted to show you that because you want to place these water features where you can see them and you can see who's coming to them. Now, this is the simplest thing of all to set up because it just attaches to your spigot. And you get the Y valve. This is the Y valve. And so you have your dripper line come off of that. Very simple. We have added timers, watering timers, 2 hours, and we have 2. So we have them come on at different times and they alternate. And this is a good idea to conserve water, number one. They're battery operated, so they don't require power per se. And this particular website, I think that's on your list too, because we found them to be very helpful if you have questions. Now, fountains, that's another thing you could do. They need an outlet that's ground fault circuit and protected. Circuit interrupter protected. And we check the levels, we refill it, and we use hydrogen peroxide to clean all of our bird baths. And it's safe as a dental rinse for us. So it breaks down into water and oxygen, and it keeps the water sanitized and oxygenated. And in the winter, these heated water fountains, it's amazing. The birds that will come to them, the red crossbills are really pretty rare, and they didn't bother to come to the feeders. They just came in for water here and at our other water feature. Okay, and there's Robert Weaver, and the 2 of us helped him put in a pondless bubbler. And this has been out there for 10 or 11 years now, I think. So you can see us in our youth on his website with this how-to video on how to do this. It's a way to just see if it is even something you'd want to try to do. And you can email us. We'll send you the free maintenance guide that Dan and I have worked up. Just to have an idea of what is entailed in maintaining it. And there are lots of different things available online if you wanted to put in something, or contractors are putting these in as well if you want to have it done by someone else. Okay, and then the last water feature is our bubbler. And this is what our woodland looked like more recently. Sans honeysuckle for the most part. We still have them pop up every now and then. But this is our bubbler pond, and it is a preformed pond set into the ground, leveled up, and this pump pulls the water into the filtration and it goes up and recirculates. And it's just completely within the system. And we added a little basin off to the side for more surface area for the birds to get to. And so this photo was included in Doug Tallamy's book, Nature's Best Hope. And it's going to be looking like this really soon. This is a picture from a couple of years ago, but a few years ago now. But you can see all the bluebells and the poppies and ginger, and the hydrangeas are just leafing out back in here. So perches, these are all perches, and the birds come in and they check out, make sure it's safe. They might come in on 3 different perches before they get close enough to the water, just to be sure that they're safe. And it's great fun to see what comes in. And birds, both tiny, like this little northern parula. It was there in the morning, and the red-shouldered hawk came in the afternoon. So I just put them into one picture for you. So we've had 126 different species of birds now at our bubbler, plus hybrids. This is that's called the Lawrence's hybrid. It's a cross between the golden winged and the blue winged. And that's another story for another time. Very interesting bird. So water is important all year long. Even in the deepest snow, we do keep it going. We've had these red poles, which were just gorgeous when they came in last year. Had a flock, which is rare. And we keep a de-icer in there during the coldest weather, because it just kicks on if it needs to, if the water gets below 35, and keeps an open area. So it continues to recirculate. Okay, in the spring, there's a big day, and in the fall, there's a big day. And that's when the majority of migrating birds are going to be pushing through. And this is 34 seconds of the behavior that I watched for over 10 minutes. I have 10 minutes of video of these birds coming in. I have no idea how many birds were actually there, but a little treat to enjoy. So there they are. There were 3 different warbler species, and mostly Tennessee warblers, and a couple Nashville and a black-throated green, along with Mr. Bossy, Mr. Big Cheese, the Carolina wren. Okay, so moving water is really magical. I've seen some birds there at that bubbler. I never thought I'd see. Pretty amazing. So we're not born to do everything, but I think this is the point at which we are called to do something. And, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. So don't be afraid, you know, jump in, because every step you take is going to be helping to save life where we live. Thank you.
Margie, thank you so much. This was such a beautiful presentation, and yeah, I love the reactions are some of the best things about Zoom functions, all the creative parts and applauses. So thank you all for sharing that with Margie. But yeah, what a gorgeous presentation. We've had quite a few comments on just saying that much. So the question that came in, and a question that it does, I think, plague those of us who like to, do what we can to encourage birds in our yard. Neighborhood cats. How do we balance wanting to encourage these, beautiful birds? You have so many that come visit. I'm very impressed by the number of species that visit your yard. Yeah, how do we balance that maybe, or what do you have any thoughts on how we balance that with our natural or domesticated predators?
Well, there are many, many reasons to encourage your neighbors to keep their cats indoors. And the American Bird Conservancy has information. I don't remember if I got that into the handout or not, because I was looking it up. But we have cats. I go out and I bang a pan or squirt with the hose. I mean, they know they're not supposed to be in our yard, but I can't be out there all the time, and we have them come at night. I just had one show up on the bubbler cam last night. And, if they're eating voles or mice, they're taking away food from the barred owl that I heard this morning as well. So they're a pet and they should be kept indoors for their own safety. We also have coyote, and they will take animals. So, this is, they're out there and they're doing well in the suburbs. So,
Yeah.
It might be something you can talk to your neighbor about. There are coyotes out there. You do want to keep your pet safe. So
we were talking, my coworkers, we were just talking about how there are even coyotes in Tower Grove Park.
yes.
So, they are everywhere these days. So that's good advice. I did find the link to American Bird Conservancy's cat indoors.
Yes, they're policy.
That in the chat for us. So those of us who are thinking about how to approach that can do so. So there was a question about why, so bird baths in the shade, is that placement to keep the water cooler and to cover from predators? Like, is there a particular reason why people should try to find those shady spots for bird baths?
Well, it definitely, all of our water features are in some shade. The water just gets hot and evaporates too quickly if it's in the sun, and even in the shade on really warm days, you can get a lot of evaporation. So even in the winter, you get evaporation. So it's important to, we keep our bird baths in the shade. Yeah.
Yes, especially with the hot temperatures we get, keep us on our toes, keeping those filled, that's for sure, if we don't do what we can to help ourselves. So there's another good question. We've run into this at some of our, some beautiful buildings that I've worked in where we have very large windows and that look out on very beautiful wooded properties. We have a lot of birds colliding into our windows. Do you run into that a lot on your property as a result, or any ideas about mitigating those kinds of issues?
There, American Bird Conservancy also has suggestions on stickers that you can put on the windows, or we adopted a design from a window treatment that we saw in Costa Rica, where it's strings hanging down and a bar across it. You knot the strings through it, and it was parachute line, I think we used, but you want it 4 inches apart. And that's just another idea to so birds realize there's something there. and they don't fly into the window.
Great, thank you. That's a great suggestion. And I wasn't aware of these links to help with these kinds of common problems that a lot of us run into. So thank you for pointing us in that direction. And then when we bring wildlife and we into our yards closer and we're encouraging that healthy ecosystem in our neighborhood yards. We also then we can't politely ask starlings to not nest in our houses. What kind of, are there things that people, this has ended up being like, how do we deter a lot of bad, of unfortunate or dangerous behaviors from the animal standpoint? But any thoughts about how to discourage that? Or should I look at Conservancy, American Bird Conservancy? Do they have a solution for this too?
Well, yeah, it's there are animals, that the deer, for instance. I mean, I didn't get into the deer, but I have had 3 bucks with great big racks out in our yard all at the same time. And I mean, their population is just out of control. And I'm not going to be down there in the yard when there's 3 bucks trying to slam each other. You just have to raise your awareness of animals like that. And I don't think a coyote is going to do anything to us particularly, although it could hurt a child. You don't want to leave a little child outside or your pets outside. I'm not sure what else to say.
Thank you for saying that. It reminded me of Dr. Camillo's talk on last Wednesday as part of the series about the effects of native landscaping. And he was talking about, we have done a lot, as a society, we have worked really hard to put barriers between us and the natural world. And so, so now we're trying to find that balance to encourage our natural habitats to thrive so that we can thrive as a species as well and the planet. And some of these things are things that we have to come to grips with our comfort level, I guess, of how we interact with the world around us and the other creatures that live here.
Yes.
And it's not easy, and especially with property damage involved, like woodpeckers on wood siding and that sort of thing. But would we rather have no woodpeckers? So those are maybe not. I think one of my best friends, they had a pileated woodpecker who really went to town on her sighting a few years ago, and I think she was very disappointed about that. But so it goes.
Yes, that's yeah. I'm not sure what to say.
It's an amazing bird to watch, but yeah, we would rather not have them on our sighting. But that's just the
I have gone outside and taken a cookie sheet and a wooden spoon to deter woodpeckers from, it's like, come on, guys, we've got all the woods back there. You're just gonna have to. But for the most part, that's not a problem. I will say, we went to a family reunion back in 2016, and I found this piece of paper that had been saved from the 1800s, and it talked about how they were afraid as they were coming through Ohio. They were afraid of the wolves. They'd see their eyes shining in the night, and they'd hear the screams of the panther. And these were people who were really afraid. They didn't understand the animals, and they were afraid of them. And those animals, mountain lion can do harm. And so they cleared the woods so that they could see what was coming, have a little more warning. And you can't blame people for that. But and it was partly to clear the land for farming, and but yeah, we have a mixed relationship with wildlife. We really do. I've seen deer in Tower Grove Park too, and deer, that threw me. I was surprised that how did they get there? How did they get there?
We had a very lengthy discussion about just this topic with the same people we were talking about. There were coyote, but there were deer, and what the theories are as to how they got there. Yeah, like the deer population is bananas. And to that end, someone asked a question. We always get questions about what kind, how to deter deer in our yards. That talk is next Wednesday. We have a
Yes.
panel discussion on how to handle, to do our best to handle hungry deer with our native garden. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, there's a balance. I think Jean, you brought up Jean Ponzi earlier. I think her kind of attitude about many things is like we have to find our own comfort levels with what we can tolerate, and that's okay. Like we can't be 100% vigilant all the time to just some of that stuff. We have to replace our siding all the time. Then that's not sustainable either.
Yes.
So figuring out how to balance those things is something we have to decide for ourselves, and I appreciate that thought. So there's some questions about bird houses, and in particular, someone asked about bluebird houses, and I know so our state birds are around, and it's always delightful to see them. But someone said they've got a couple of houses on their property, but all they get are European sparrows. Are those just because we put up a house for a bird that we want to come, and other birds like European sparrows might move in, as this happened with this person. Are there things that we can do beyond just planting or installing a house for a particular species to encourage that species to come to our yards?
Well, let me say, first of all, if you're only getting Eurasian tree sparrows or house sparrows, take the house down. Don't let them nest in the houses. That's my feeling. We don't owe them. They are and interested, they're using up resources for our native birds. And anyway, we don't owe them anything, and they are not legally protected. Okay. The other birds are. As far as attracting bluebirds, if you're just putting up a house hoping to attract them, I mean, it's possible to attract them because some of them do migrate. Some of them have been further south, and they, about the 1st of March or so is when they're looking for a house. But last year was the first year we put up a house. I mean, I'd had them coming into the yard for food, and I just didn't think we quite had enough the right kind of open habitat to put up a house. There is I could suggest the Missouri Bluebird Society. Look them up. There's also the National Bluebird Society with lots and lots and lots of information about, it might answer some of those questions.
Great, thank you.
But
Yeah, I don't. So we'll thank you for handling some of these more bird-oriented questions rather than native plant questions. But good, we haven't had them come up. Good to address some of those. But as far as plants, we do get a lot of questions about. Well, here's one about the soft landing. So as we're working through, we're finally in spring. Hallelujah. And trying to think about the next steps for our yards and our gardens. If we have one of those soft landings, if we have the soft plant and leaf litter that's been doing its thing all winter, when is a good idea to when can we move it? Because someone has it in their driveway. That's the driving question. When can they finally move the soft landing and hope that the caterpillars and such have had enough time to do their thing?
You mean move it off the driveway?
Yeah, I think that there's one that's safe to move, and I guess maybe any of our piles, but this is more of it's in a not a great spot. On top of being something they want maybe not to have a pile of.
Okay. If you have a bed to move it to or an area to move it to, just do it as gently as you can, I guess. I
think I know with like the no no mow May idea,
Yes.
that I think in here, because we're more temperate than some of the other places where this happens, like if we can make it to the middle of April or middle of May, sorry, middle of May, I think that's
Mhm.
kind of some things I know that I've heard that might be helpful too.
Yes. Yeah, I've heard that too. Um, so we don't mow very often. I mean, we don't need to because we're not fertilizing and there's a lot of shade and, it's not growing very much. So the few areas of lawn we have, so.
Well, that was the other question. Someone, we talked in some of the other programs about, about replacing turf with other things. And someone has clover that is kind of taking over. And they're wondering, should they let it go or should they replace it with something else? They don't use weed killers, et cetera, but they just, is that a good substitute or good alternative rather for a usable green space that they can work and play on?
I would guess so.
That's not necessarily a fair question. That's not your topic. But it is again, another common question of, and actually, if you have questions about that, we've had, I'm trying to remember which of the more recent programs. I think the invasive to native talk, transforming your yard from last Tuesday night. I think that might have more answer that more thoroughly.
Yeah, okay. And I missed Dr. Camillo's. I've got to watch his. My link wouldn't work. I'm not sure
Oh,
why. So I was like, oh, I guess I'll have to watch it later.
well, yes, that sometimes that happens, but anytime it does, you can always call the library. We have the link handy, so we can make sure you have the right thing. But that's for everybody to know.
That's good.
But also, yeah, it was a great talk, and it was very, really interesting in terms of like the research components that back up the needs for native landscaping and how that's going to help us as our population grows and we need to think about that. So let me see. We've got lots of comments, and I will come back to the fact that we've had a lot of comments that someone said they had no question. They just wanted to tell you that you're really cool. So
Oh, I'll tell my grandkids, they'll love that.
it's nice. See? um, yeah, so so you talked about, I liked that you mentioned that you kind of make a concerted effort to limit your time working in your yard, so that you're not disturbing the birds and other creatures from what they're up to.
Yeah.
And so people, when our yards are a little more surrounded, I guess, by other people or maybe walkways and that sort of thing. I guess the question is like, do those dog walkers or people walking by, do they deter the bird populations on properties like this, or is it still possible to create an oasis?
It's real interesting. That's a very interesting question because in the yard behind us, I noticed it this one day. They had their crew there to blow leaves and they were doing this. And we still had all these birds in our yard. And it was like the birds knew right where the line was. They knew these guys weren't going to come any closer than this particular area. I can't believe they're still there. Because sometimes the trash trucks, the noise of that is enough to get everybody to flush for a while, but then they'll come back in pretty quickly. And it's the same when we go out there. I try, and Dan has been wonderful about this because it took me a long time to figure it out. But if we wait, it's like they all go up and rest for a while. Let's go clean the bubbler then. And we do it. And by the time we come back in, they're ready to come down and see what we did and check it out and get back in. And so, these things work out if you just kind of pay attention and give them a little deference. It gets a little tough because now we've got 2 bluebird houses, a chickadee house, and there were two pair of phoebes trying to nest under the gazebo. It's like, can we go outside? Yes, we can. But it's going to be busy for a while now with them trying to feed their babies, and as the eggs begin to hatch in another month or so. So
That's no point. And you're right. Yeah, you can tell the times of day or notice when they've backed off an area. When you have a lot going on, then you start to notice how they behave.
yeah,
But thank you too for pointing out that mourning doves are in such a grade of concern, because I think the three last I lived in the city before the pandemic and lived with my folks in a very lovely wooded area with lots of wonderful native plants and things around during the last 3 years, and back in the suburbs. But they there have been mourning doves that have nested, I think, in a windowsill of every place that I've lived in those times. And one of them did successfully, it was high enough off the ground that they were able to raise several of their young, but they lost some due to a windstorm. But yeah, it's surprising because I've seen plenty of nests. But someone else mentioned that they had they had some nesting on their air conditioner. Are there kinds of plants or places that we can create to give them a little safer spot to nest, since they do seem to like very tidy, even surfaces?
that's interesting because I've only seen them try to nest in like a pine tree across the street. And they're just, I don't think they do it very well all the time. They're not the best nesters. So I'd have to look into that a little more to see. I don't know where they nested, why I happen to see this young bird, but I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a juvenile, it's a really young bird. And I'd love to know where they nested because that's a cool thing, something you just don't get. And believe me, I am looking
Yes,
all the
I
time.
believe that.
Guilty. Guilty.
No, that's really interesting, and it'll help me. And now I'm definitely going to be paying closer attention to it.
Yeah. And I wanted to say one other thing. When we removed all that ivy and the winter creeper, and as long as it wasn't near our wetland, we were using glyphosate products, the Roundup or the Rodeo products. But we were following the Shaw Nature Reserve protocol and doing it at a specific time in September when the cuticle of the leaf is broken and it takes it in easier, stuff like that. Some people don't want to use Roundup at all. And if anybody has ideas or has methods, I have read that you can use a vinegar or a vinegar dish liquid solution and salt, on some of these things. But I haven't ever read that it works. I don't know if it works. If anybody has information about that, it would be great to pass that along. So
keep our eyes peeled, library patrons and webinar attendees, if you know of anything. Thank you. But I haven't seen that come up either. And as often as that question rises, yeah, no one's come up with or shared an anecdote of something that's worked for them. So keep an eye on for sure.
Okay.
Well, we've been chatting here for a while, answering questions now for a bit, and so I think this is a good place for us to wrap up and leave questions potentially for upcoming presentations. And we have plenty of resources available to you all who have joined us. Thank you for being here with us this evening. But we have plenty of things for you to check out on your spare time, if any of us have that these days. But I'm going to drop into the chat one last time. I've got the Native Landscaping Manual from Nature Reserve, Shaw's Nature Reserve handy, so I'm going to put that in there. But I'll put our little guides once more. You'll get an email with all these things. And we will, you'll have opportunities to take a look at Partners for Native Landscaping's list of resources. The library, I put together a LibGuide that can help anyone who's interested in exploring native landscaping, as well as many of the partners and organizations we have here in Missouri. So thank you so much, Margie, for being with us. This was really, as many people have said, very inspiring presentation, beautiful photos, very encouraging. Definitely, helps us all want to create these kinds of oases of native and making them the norm of native landscapes to encourage our lovely wildlife. So thank you so much.
Okay, you're very welcome. It was my pleasure.
Look forward to doing this again sometime. In the meantime, thanks everybody. Hope you can join us for one of the remaining webinar sessions, and look for this link for tonight's recording in your email. In the meantime, thanks again. Thank you, Partners for Native Landscaping. We'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.